Pumpkin Valley, and this is Floral Art Review, where we use our AI DesignEye to look at a previous competition piece of mine and give us some feedback based on the principles and elements of design, as well as some suggestions for improvement of the design. This week we're looking at a large design, a floor-based design called Classical with a Twist. Now, I hesitated because I remembered that this was sponsored by an organisation that, for this particular class title in this competition, require you to use contemporary techniques. So it had to be meeting that class title of Classical with a Twist, but using contemporary techniques. So things like shadowing and weaving and grouping together of things, the mixture of dried and fresh plant material, manipulating the leaves, all those sorts of things that are contemporary techniques. So here I have used as the backdrop, we'll start with the backdrop first of all. I've got an old photographic stand just with the single bar at the top to drape over the black material to cover it, and then some scarves. The scarves are actually coming out of a roll of wire mesh, which is a contemporary technique to use. And my idea was that they would be coming out of that and they would be twisted so that they would cascade down over the two sides of the design, one with fresh plant material and one with dried plant material, just to give it that contrast of textures. And what I tried to do was keep the colours in keeping with the different, although the scarves are very similar, they're in different colour combinations. So I tried to keep the colour palette right for whichever side it was on in the design. And I've used a stand that's got a bit of a twist in it that would be normally a pedestal stand that we might use for a classical design. And the fresh plant material is in the shape of a classical design, but I have manipulated the leaves somewhat and used plant material that is more modern than it is traditional. And then at the front we've got some tatami palm spathe, or palm inflorescence rather, with some cut Banksia leaves, Banksia slices, sorry. I wasn't happy with the design when I did it. I didn't think it was anything particular. I still look at it now and think it's a bit of a nothing design. There's a whole heap of things that I would do differently, starting with the fact that there's nothing that brings it together. There's no base covering, so nothing that combines those 3 areas or 4 areas of the design. But I'm interested to see what DesignEye thinks of it and what it can tell me in terms of improving the design. It actually placed 3rd in the competition, and I was very surprised because I really didn't think it was much of anything. And often I will find that the designs I like least are the ones the judges like the most. So let's now see what DesignEye has got to say based on the principles and elements of design about this design, Classical with a Twist. The overall first impression: this installation presents an inventive interpretation of classical aesthetics through a fusion of traditional floral arrangement and sculptural fabric art with a distinctly contemporary edge. So it met all of the criteria that the judges would have been looking for, which surprises me, I have to say. I think I'm going to be surprised all the way through this. The piece evokes a sense of theatrical elegance, hinting at classical drapery, ceremonial columns, or fashion forms, while introducing unexpected materials and shapes. So how interesting is it that we can give an image of a design that we weren't happy with in terms of how it interpreted the class title? Maybe we struggled with interpreting the class title. I know that I did with this particular one. And independently, just based on the principles and elements of design, DesignEye can say it does these things, it gets these things right. So let's now see what it says about some of those principles and elements of design. We look at balance. First of all, the composition achieves asymmetrical balance, with the main floral design positioned on the left and a textural sculptural form on the right, countered by the central draped structure. Vertical alignment between the 3 key zones, left floral, central fabric, right sculpture, maintains visual stability, while varied visual height adds interest. The heavy texture of the florals on the left and the intricate detail of the woven textures on the right are balanced by the soft flow of the fabrics in the centre. So I've got some contrast there, and I've got some interest there, but I've kept it all very vertical. And I needed to do that because of the height, obviously 1.8 metre area. You need to be thinking about a nice tall extension. I'll be interested to see though what it says about scale and proportion, because in my looking at it, there's a couple of things I think are out of proportion and scale to the rest of the design. Proportion and scale now. The overall scale of the piece is large, commanding the space well. It reads almost as a triptych, with each section proportionally contributing to the whole. And that's an interesting observation, because I certainly didn't think about it that way when I was putting it together. I was trying to bring it all together as one design, but sometimes it might be better for us to think about three sections that where one flows into the other, as it seems to think it does with this one. The floral arrangement is in proportion with the height and width of the stand, and the materials used do not overwhelm the base. The woven structure at the base adds an engaging low-lying element that grounds the tall verticals and adds depth to the composition. So that's where it's talking about. There is the tatami inflorescence from the palm. I personally think that it's too small. I think it's out of proportion to the rest of the design, but we'll see what else there is in the suggestions. Rhythm and movement. The eye moves naturally from the vibrant florals on the left up to the fabric canopy, and then down the flowing scarves to the woven element on the right. The repetition of draped fabric, curved forms and organic textures establishes a pleasing rhythm. The twist in the title is echoed literally in the twisting vertical rod support, the figure on the right, cleverly adding a subtle dynamic gesture. So that's the pedestal on the right that has the twisted element within the metal rods that of its structure. I would like to have seen more twisting in the design itself. As I said, I had hoped that the scarves would be more twisted as they were coming out, so that was going to be my twisted element as well, to bring the two parts of it together. Contrast and dominance. There is a strong contrast between the structural floral form and the fluidity of the fabrics, the tropical vibrance of the flowers, especially the orange bird of paradise, and the earthy textured woven elements. The dark fabric and pedestal and the light background help the forms to stand out. So that's the important consideration when you are presenting a design where the staging is supplied. This staging is supplied for us, so I know exactly what it is. We know what the colour is, so that if we scratch it, we always carry a little bit of spare paint to top it up. And sometimes with these designs on this particular staging, I will paint the structures so that they blend in and it looks like the design is actually floating. But in this case, I wanted it to stand out against the grey. So it's a pretty good colour to use most colours against it. The dominant element is arguably the central column of fabrics, but the floral work on the left holds its own due to the vivid colour and sharp form. To my eye, the central column is the dominant feature, and particularly the black. And I'm a bit disappointed in how that looks. To me, it almost looks like it's a person standing there with these two elements either side of the person. But let's see what else DesignEye has got to say for us. Unity and harmony. Despite the variety of materials, fabric, florals, bark, raffia, twine and wood, colour and texture link the entire design. Textile patterns echo natural elements, animal print, foliage, colours, tying them to the botanical theme. And that's what I said earlier about I wanted the colour scheme on either side to reflect the colours that were in the fabric. Unity could be improved by bringing a stronger floral or botanical element into the right-hand zone so that all sections feel equally part of the floral design world. I think that's very true. I think that I've got some agapanthus seed heads and some other dried material there. And what I could have done was had some dried palm leaves, because what that would do is not only bring a bigger element into that side of it, but it would repeat the palm leaves on the fresh side of the design. Line. Vertical line dominates the structure. Fabric columns, tall floral stems, the twisted wire stand, conveying elegance and strength. Curved lines from the palm fronds and twisted elements add a playful twist to an otherwise classical formality. As I've said before, I would really like to have seen more in the twisting side of things, but the vertical line was important because of the dimensions of the staging, and so it's more important to get that line very clear and interpret from the line how you want to present the class title. Texture. This design is rich in textural contrasts, smooth silky fabric versus coarse natural twine and bark, glossy tropical leaves versus dry sculptural grass heads. The tactile appeal invites closer inspection and adds visual depth. As many of you know, the contrast in texture are the thing that I like to focus on in my designs. I like to feel that it makes it interesting because it makes you look again and again to see where the contrast is in those designs. And again, I thought that it blended well with the fabric that I was using. Colour. A balanced palette of earth tones and jungle brights, browns, greens, oranges and muted golds. The bright florals draw immediate attention, while the fabric and natural elements introduce subtlety and layering. The design respects classical tones, black, bronze and neutral, but infuses them with a modern pop of tropical vibrance, a clever fulfillment of twist. And that's something that it wouldn't have occurred to me, that just by using those colours against the darker, more traditional classical colours would add that twist on the interpretation that I should have been looking for in my design. Space. Effective use of negative space between the three main vertical elements prevents the composition from feeling crowded. That's probably true, but I still think that there's too much space in it. The space behind the floral arrangement allows the silhouette of the palm leaves to cast a dramatic shadow, enhancing dimensionality. That's a bonus. I know that there are lights across the top that focusing on these designs where they are staged, so I always have to think about how the light will work in terms of the design. But it's also about these designs were judged from the side as well, so they have to be interesting from the sides as well as from the front. So at the sides you wouldn't necessarily see, on one side you wouldn't see the shadow, on the other side you would see the shadow, and it becomes part of the design. I still think that it's a bit bare, it's a bit blank, and I think what it is that there's nothing that brings it together on the base. It's just these separate placements, as I said earlier. So let's now have a look at some of the suggestions to improve the design. Unify the right side with florals. Introduce a small floral or foliage detail on the sculpture or near the woven element at the base. This would help connect the entire design as a cohesive floral composition rather than a floral and art piece side by side. I think that's very true. I think it needed some transition between the fresh on one side and the dried on the other, and going down into using that base area would have been the place to do it. Some grasses perhaps that had the dried seed heads at the top, but the green grasses, that green element of foliage at the bottom. Probably wouldn't use floral, I'd probably use foliage for that. Enhance the twist concept visually. You can amplify the twist metaphor visually by incorporating a twisted vine or spiral botanical form linking the floral and sculptural zones. This would visually tie the story together. And I think that's probably very true. You know, had I had some twisted vine coming out from the top where the foliage arrangement is in the wire mesh where the fabric comes out, if I'd had some vine coming out of there as well and bringing it down through the whole design, so down to each side and then down to the base and back again, I think that would have made the interpretation just that much stronger. Soften fabric edges. The top of the fabric structure is visually strong, but the join at the crown could be softened or made more deliberate, perhaps with a floral or botanical crown element like pine needles, banksia cones, or even woven fibres to finish it off more organically. And once again, that's very true. I think I probably use the pine cones or banksia cones and have the twisted element coming out of those. At the moment, it just looks like it's a shoulder pads on a coat to me. I think that top section where the wire mesh is, if I'd had something that was very visually strong, also then would be easier to reflect that and repeat that in the base where the banksia slices are. And that would bring it together well. Fine-tune grounding elements. The wood slices at the base are textural and fitting, but could be slightly rearranged or layered with soft moss or vine to blend more organically with the vertical element. So exactly what I'm thinking now that I've looked at it and I've heard what it's got to say, my brain is now working in what could have been done to actually enhance both my interpretation and the design as a whole. So, final thoughts on this particular design. Classical with a twist is a theatrical and multi-layered composition that intelligently merges botanical design with textile art and sculptural craft. It speaks of ceremony, cultural richness, and a contemporary creativity. With minor enhancement, it becomes a standout feature in any curated space or competition. So the changes that it's suggested are minor, but they will make a big difference. So it's classically that 80-20 rule, 20% of what you do will make 80% of the difference. So they are all things that I would consider in terms of this design, and it's certainly probably a title that I might see again, given that this organisation that sponsored it does sponsor a title every year of this particular show. And I think it makes us, in terms of that contemporary element in floral design, it makes us think a little bit more about what is classical or traditional, what is modern and what is contemporary. Always a confusing area between modern and contemporary, but we'll leave that for another day. So that is our classical with a twist analysis from DesignEye. Thanks for joining me. I'm Kim Bailey and this is Floral Art Review.